All right, let's get to it. I do recommend that you are taking notes, especially in this chapter, because it's kind of dense and there's a lot of material to it. Yesterday we talked about ancient Greece and its relationship with Persia, culminating in the Persian Wars, in which the Persian Empire attacked Greece twice in an effort to invade and take over because the Greeks ticked them off a little bit. The Persian Wars ended after the second invasion following the battles of Thermopylae. I don't want that right now. The Battle of Salamis, and then finally the final battle of the Persian War, the Battle of Plataea. So make sure you're familiar with those. Does anyone have any questions about any of those? That's a weird question, Jacob. Does anyone have any questions about any of these battles that we talked about yesterday before we move on? Alrighty. If you do have any questions that come up, please just shoot me a message and I will help as best as I can. We're not doing that today. Today we're going to move into section 2 of chapter 9, which deals with ancient Sparta and ancient Athens. We've mentioned both of these city-states before, but we're going to go into a little more detail on the cultural practices of each today. So make sure you're paying close attention because you do need to know the differences in the lifestyles and the values of each of these separate city-states, because while they're both Greek, they're really, really different from each other. So, despite the fact that these are both Greek city-states, Athens and Sparta are extremely different places. They have different cultural practices, values. They are also rivals with one another. Now, they work together during the Persian Wars because mutual survival is necessary. But that relationship is going to deteriorate, and at the end of this chapter, at the end of this section, we'll be talking about something called the Peloponnesian War, which was a war between Athens and its allies and Sparta and its allies, and it almost tore Greece apart. So that's going to be the main focus in the center of this section today. Now, the ideologies of the two places are very different. In Sparta, daily life is dominated by the military. They value discipline, they value obedience, courage, service to Sparta. In Athens, they put a lot more emphasis on education, thinking, reasoning, philosophy, the arts. They have a strong military, but it's not, their entire society isn't focused around the military, not in the same way that Sparta's is. And we're starting off with talking about Sparta specifically today. Now, Sparta is dominated by its army. Everything in Sparta is focused on its army and military life. All Spartan men that are citizens in the city-state of Sparta, they serve in the military. They are soldiers. You don't have a choice in the matter. If you're a Spartan man, you're going to be a soldier. You don't get to opt to be a cobbler or a farmer. You are a soldier, will like it or not. They're able to do this because they have an entire class of people called helots who are slaves of Sparta. They handle all of those other jobs and responsibilities, and they far outnumber the Spartans themselves. That's why Sparta has such a strong military in the first place. At one point in the past, the helots actually revolted against Sparta. They want to keep that from happening again. So in order to keep their large class of slaves under control, the Spartans developed this powerful military to provide security and as a threat, because if somebody's got an army that powerful, you're probably not going to try and revolt against them. So when a boy is born in Sparta, they're taken before a government official who basically checks them over like livestock and inspects them. And if they're found to be healthy, the child's abandoned outside of the city and left for dead. Every once in a while, somebody might find this abandoned child in the wilderness and take him in, but for the most part, they die from exposure or wild animals. And that's just one of the sad truths of the life at the time. If you are not able in Spartan society to contribute to the strength of Sparta, they don't see any worth in you. And so they discard a lot of children in that way. Healthy boys are actually trained from an early age to be soldiers. They're given training at home first and a basic education. And then later on, they're actually taken from their families. So their training includes physical training. They also are trained to endure hardships that they're going to face as soldiers, like not having shoes in wintertime or not having heavy enough clothes or survival training in the wilderness, things like that. It's very harsh. Young boys died all of the time. Now, boys are trained at home and given a basic education, reading, writing, dancing, up until about the age of 12. And then they're taken from their families for this military and physical training. And it is harsh. Now, soldiers between the ages of 20 and 30 live in barracks, and they only occasionally visit their families. Married men have to slip away from the barracks to even see their wives, and they don't live with their families. Their wives raise their children up until, if they're a son, up until they're old enough to go to training themselves. Spartan men actually have to serve in the military until they're 60 years old. So this is a lifelong obligation because people didn't live as long at that time. And so it's pretty much a lifelong commitment. You're in the military probably until you die. And soldiers are expected to be very obedient, self-disciplined. They also live lives free of luxury and comforts. This is where the term Spartan, in reference to accommodations, comes from. For example, if you enter a room and all there is like a bed with plain white sheets and it's very minimal, we might call this Spartan. It's because the Spartans themselves lived very minimal lives free of luxury. And that's because they believe that luxury makes you weak. They believe this luxury makes you weak and can't afford to be weak as a Spartan soldier. And now, because Spartan men are often away at war, women are given a lot more rights and freedoms than Greek women elsewhere. Now, please understand, Spartan women, their purpose still is to reproduce. That's what society expects of them. That said, Spartan women are the mothers and wives and sisters of soldiers, and so they are given more respect. After all, Spartan society and its continuation actually depends on women to have strong, healthy sons. They don't fulfill domestic responsibilities like other Greek women. That sort of stuff is left for the Helots to do. So Spartan women don't really have those kinds of responsibilities like an Athenian woman might. An Athenian woman might be expected to weave all day and do something of that nature. A Spartan woman, that's not her job. Her job is to become as strong and capable as possible so that when she's ready, she can have a strong son. Spartan women participate in athletics, they participate in sports, they're given a public education. All of this is intended for the purpose of making sure that the woman is strong and capable, because the Spartans believe that only a woman strong and capable can raise and bear a strong and capable son. And so they do have a lot more freedoms. Now, other city-states would later say the reason Sparta declines ultimately is because they gave their women too many rights, which is kind of wild, but that is what they believed. It's a largely different society, and it was scrutinized pretty heavily and criticized for the freedoms that it gave to its women at that time. I'm going to pause the recording so we can watch this video really quick and resume that thing on. All right, so if you get a chance, take a look at the article on the next page. It's a good look at the athletics education of women of Sparta from this time, because they were considered to be pretty outspoken, and this was a pretty radical way for women to live at that time in history. Granted, again, their purpose is still for reproduction, but they do have a lot more rights in history in Greek society than other Greek women would have had from different city states. That actually looks like a really good video. We might come back to that. Let me see how long it is.
We just had the most amazing family vacation.
Figuring out the We may come back to this shortly. All right. So a little about just the general life in Sparta. Function of their government in particular. Sparta is officially ruled by 2 kings at any given time. Now the kings, they don't have complete control of the country by any means. Mostly they just jointly lead the army. The ones who have the real power in Sparta are the elected officials. They hold a good bit more power over things like law and decision making. And they run Sparta's day to day activity. So Sparta does have elected officials, and they make a lot more decisions than, say, the 2 kings that are basically really glorified generals. Um, the elected officials also handle dealings with Sparta and other city states. So any sort of negotiations and diplomacy, which I can't imagine the Spartans were particularly great at diplomacy, but typically speaking, that fell more to those officials than to the kings. Sparta's government, like I mentioned before, is designed to control the Helots. Um, the Helots do far outnumber the Spartans or the actual citizens of Sparta. Um, and they live pretty miserable, unhappy lives. They're not allowed to leave the land that they live on, to leave the land that they work, particularly if they're farming. And so they're not happy. It's not a particularly happy or pleasant existence. Slavery generally is not. But the Spartans completely depend on them for everything, like farming and any sort of labor. And so they have this large, powerful army for the purpose of keeping the Helots in line and keeping them under control. Because if the place that has enslaved you, has a very strong military, you're less likely to revolt. And their entire society is structured around keeping the Helots under control. Watch that later. Now we're going to talk a little bit about ancient Athens. Athens is wildly different from Sparta. Like I said, guys, they're all Greek city states, but they have extremely different cultures and ways of life. Athens focuses a lot more on things like education, things like the arts and architecture and mathematics and philosophy. They value the mind a lot more. Now, young boys in Athens, particularly those from wealthy families, are given physical training as well as an education. Their physical training is not nearly as harsh as Sparta's, but it's relatively challenging. All Athenian citizens, male Athenian citizens, are expected to serve in the military, but they only have to serve for 2 years between the ages of 18 and 20. They don't have to dedicate their entire lives to soldiering. Older men only have to serve in times of war, such as uh, in more modern times, for example, when we have a draft because there's a war and soldiers are needed. Athenian men do have a responsibility to defend the nation in the event of war. Now, Athenian students do learn to read, write, count, sing, and play musical instruments, things like that. Typically, education can be open to multiple Athenian boys. Even lower class boys learn to read and write some. People from poorer families still do get, boys from poorer families still get a bit of an education, but it's not nearly as good or as extensive as if you came from a wealthy family. Wealthy families, their sons have private tutors, and those tutors teach them things like philosophy and geometry and astronomy and other subjects, and they get a very good, solid, extensive education. They also learn how to be public speakers so that they can express themselves more effectively in the assembly where they make decisions and vote. Poor families, their sons usually don't receive as good of an education, and usually the poor become farmers. And despite the fact that all society depends on farmers, they are at the bottom of the barrel, so to speak. For girls, life in Athens isn't great. Women in Athens have really virtually no education, except for some wealthier girls will have private tutors if their family deems it necessary or wise to educate them, but they have no rights. Most girls learn household tasks like weaving and sewing. Their job is to tend to their homes and act as wives and mothers. They don't participate in physical activity and athletics. They're barely allowed to leave their home except on like special occasions. They're not allowed to participate in government, even though Athens has this reputation for freedom and democracy and things like that. Athenian women, they don't get that freedom and democracy and all of that. It doesn't apply to them. Women can't buy property. They're not even allowed to disobey their husbands on different things, or fathers. Spelled husbands wrong. There's a B there, by the way. So, all in all, life for a woman in Athens is pretty bleak. You don't have a lot of options. You don't have a lot of opportunities. You're pretty limited on what you can and can't do. Not sure how many slides are left here. Before we move into the Peloponnesian War, I want to show you this quick video about Athens versus Sparta, just to get a little rundown on the difference between those two city-states more specifically. I'm going to pause the video here. Again. Okay, so all of that comes together in what we call the Peloponnesian War. Now, even though Athens and Sparta worked together to defeat the Persians during the Persian Wars, many city-states still don't get along well after that's over. They came together temporarily because they had to. That doesn't mean that there's a lasting alliance between them. Athens and Sparta are still rivals. They still disagree and they still feel threatened by one another. Now, a lot of city-states form an alliance with Athens after the Persian Wars end. This comes to be called the Delian League. They all just sort of start working together. That said, Athens is easily the strongest member of the Delian League. And they decided that they were in charge. Basically, what they do is they start treating the other members of the league as if they are subjects, and they refuse to let them leave, which results in Athens establishing an empire, essentially, without ever fighting anybody. They're just like, hey, you're going to do what we tell you to now. And the others are like, okay, I guess. I don't really have any choice. They didn't really leave them an option there because Athens is a pretty darn powerful city-state at that time. They've got a strong navy. These other smaller city-states, they really can't stand up against them. Now, obviously, Sparta is not part of the Delian League. This is just a quick breakdown of the different territories of allied city-states to Athens. The territory of Athens is in orange here, and all of the yellow. That's all part of the Delian League, smaller city-states and their territories that kind of fell under Athenian control. Somebody's got their microphone off. Thank you. So, The Delian League is not the only alliance that is formed at this time. Hang on one second. Let me let these guys go to lunch real quick. Come on, boys. Okay, so like I was saying, the Delian League is this alliance that's kind of run by Athens. The Spartans and their allies in southern Greece kind of formed their own league called the Peloponnesian League. They formed their own alliance. And it's named the Peloponnesian League because of the name of the peninsula that the cities are all located on. If you look at everything that's in purple to the bottom of the screen here, that's all part of that Peloponnesian League. The Delian League is all this territory in orange. Make sense? Now, here's the thing. Athens is getting pretty darn powerful, and Sparta's starting to feel threatened by that. Not just Sparta, but Sparta's allies are starting to feel threatened by that. And eventually, Sparta decides to declare war on Athens in order to stop their growth and expansion because they keep expanding their power. And that's pretty scary if you're in a city-state close by. This starts what we call the Peloponnesian War in 431 BC. It's a conflict that's going to last until 404 BC. So from 431 BC to 404 BC is the Peloponnesian War. No, they are not fighting that entire time. They actually are going to take a break for a while, but ultimately they end up getting back into a fight with one another. So how this went down. The Spartans decided to surround the city of Athens in 431 BC. And they think that if they wait the Athenians out, they can kind of force them to surrender. What they do is they start burning the crops in the fields around Athens, and they think they can like cut them off from their food supply. The Athenians do not come out of their city. And when the Spartans start cutting off their food supply or destroying the crops around the city, the Athenians start escorting merchants by sea into Athens. So they kind of just circumvent that problem entirely, and the Spartans are like, dang it, I thought that would work. It doesn't work. So, in addition, the Athenian navy starts attacking Sparta's allies, and the Spartans are like, now I have to go defend that city over there. And this is turning into much more of a headache than I originally intended. So it kind of turns into a bit of a mess there. Neither side ends up gaining any real advantage. For 10 years, the Spartans, for 10 years of fighting, and then finally the Spartans are like, forget it, we're going home. So in 415 BC, the Spartans are like, bye. And they go home. I'm sorry, I got that messed up. Neither side can gain an advantage for 10 years, so the Spartans end up going home. And then 15 years after that, in the year 415 BC, Athens starts expanding once more. The Spartans are like, dang it. Athens ends up sending its army and navy to the island of Sicily, and Sicily is an ally of Sparta. The Sicilians actually defeat Athens and destroy most of their navy, which is a huge blow to the Athenian strength of Athens. And Sparta's like, I smell weakness. And since Athens is so weakened, they start attacking Athens once more, taking advantage of that. The war starts back up. So 415 BC, after a brief break, the war starts back up. I'm getting my years mixed up just a tiny bit there. And it's a little bit unclear, so I'm going to double check some of that. But ultimately what happens is the Athenians do fight bravely, but they're outnumbered and outclassed, really. So the Spartans end up winning. They cut off the food supply completely to Athens and starved them out. In 404 BC, the Athenians surrender and the Peloponnesian War ends. Sparta, for a time, becomes the most powerful city state in Greece for about 30 years, and they control nearly all of Greece during that time. However, other city states start looking at Sparta jealously and start feeling threatened by Sparta themselves. They start to resent Sparta. And this leads to a period of war in which control of Greece shifts from one polis to the next for a time. Um, Greece is left weakened and separated, uh, and that leaves it open to attack from outside powers, specifically the Macedonians will be attacking them, and that's actually something we're going to get into with the next section of this chapter when we discuss Alexander the Great. I'm going to double check a few of my years because I think I've mixed up some things and I want to make sure I get all of that correct. I'd like you all to make sure that you spend a bit of time studying tonight. I'll review with you the information tomorrow in the morning before your quiz. Does anyone have any questions? All right. In that case, I'm going to end our lesson here.